Hi, everybody. This is Bradley Thomas of the law offices of Bradley Ashton Thomas, coming to you live on a beautiful spring day in Washington, D.C. Now, I want to talk about Heir Property today. When I say Heir Property, I'm not talking about A-I-R, heir, as in Air Jordan. I'm talking about H-E-I-R, as in inheritance. Heir Property. Now, what is Heir Property? Well, Heir Property is property that is owned by a number of related people. They may be siblings, they may be cousins, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, but they're related in some way. And they all own a share of a piece of property that was left to them by their grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather, someone in their line of ancestry. Now, it sounds like a good thing, right? I own a piece of property. I own a piece of property that my great-grandma owned. Well, the problem is this. There are expenses to maintaining property of any kind of real property, land, buildings, houses. There are expenses. You have to pay taxes, and you have to maintain the property. There has to be a payment for upkeep. And the problem with Heir Property is you may have 25 or 30 different people who own a stake in the property, but usually only one or two of them take it on as their responsibility to pay the taxes and to pay for the upkeep of the property. That can be a problem. Now, how does Heir Property come about? Well, here's what happens. Let's say your great-great-grandparents bought a piece of property 90 years ago. And they didn't have any wills, so when they died, the property was inherited by their 5 children. And as each of the children died, the property was inherited by their children, and so forth and so on. So now, here you are today, and this property has anywhere from 20 to 25 to 30 to 35 different owners. Each one of them owns a very small piece. Maybe one owns 5%, many own 1% or less. And they're spread out all over the country. What's worse is many of them don't even know each other. They're related through DNA, but they have no personal relationship with one another. And so it's difficult to expect them to work together in terms of the ownership and maintenance of this property. All right? So let's say the person who is paying the taxes dies or just gets tired of being the one carrying the burden. What happens to the property? Well, if nobody picks up those taxes, the property ends up being defaulted to the local jurisdiction. In other words, your family loses the property. If the property is not maintained, sometimes the local jurisdiction will come in and they will cut the grass, or they'll trim the trees, or they'll do maintenance, and they'll charge the expense of that to the property, and it'll be part of the taxes on the property. Somebody has to pay that. How do you avoid Heir Property? Well, the best way to avoid Heir Property is to make sure that you have a will, and you leave the property in your will to those you want to leave it to. You don't have to leave it to all your children, but if you do, you make sure you leave it in a way in which it doesn't degenerate over the generations into Heir Property. In other words, there are 3 ways to own property. There's tenants by the entirety, there are tenants in common, and there are joint tenants with right of survivorship. Now, tenants by the entirety requires that the owners be a married couple. Tenants in common means that there is no right of survivorship. And joint tenants means that each person owns an undivided share, but there is the right of survivorship. So that if one of them passes away, that share does not get divided into by that person's children or grandchildren. That share goes to the other joint owners. And so that helps you to avoid Heir Property down the road. Well, there's a lot more detail to this. And if you want to know more about it, contact me, the law offices of Bradley Ashton Thomas, 202-289-7574. 202-289-7574, or look us up on the web at www.bradleythomaslaw.com. That's www.bradleythomaslaw.com. Happy to help you, happy to take care and make sure that your property does not become Heir Property down the road. Make sure you have proper wills, trusts, powers of attorney, and medical directives. Call us today, Bradley Thomas, at 202-289-7574. And see you next time. Bye-bye.